Welcome to the 200th episode of the Just Grow Something podcast, my gardening friends. I launched this podcast back in February of 2021 as a way to pass on the gardening knowledge that I had gained from my experiences on our own homestead and farm and what I had learned as I worked my way through my horticulture degree at Oregon State University. I've continued to learn along the way and try to pass on as much of that to you as I reasonably can in the 30 minutes or so a week that we spend together here, as well as through reels and TikTok videos and the articles that I write over on the website and the Facebook group and probably a few other places that I'm forgetting about. Getting into the rhythm of coming up with a topic each week and then recording and editing and publishing that episode, plus trying to put creatives together to post to social media to promote those episodes definitely took some time. And I still don't always get the social media part of it right. Heck, sometimes I don't get the recording, editing, and publishing of it right. Some of you have been along for the ride since day one. Some of you are brand new. No matter where you fall on that scale, I am sincerely happy that you are here and we can all be learning and growing as gardeners together. This season, I've been asking you a question each month to send in your answers to, but today, you are asking the questions and I am doing the answering. To celebrate 200 episodes, I did an Ask Me Anything and you all had some great questions. Some about gardening, some about the business of farming, some personal, and I am here to answer them all. Let's dig in. Hey, I'm Karen. I started gardening in a small corner of my suburban backyard, and now 18 years later, I've got a degree in horticulture and operate a 40-acre market farm. I believe there is power in food and that everyone should know how to grow at least a little bit of their own. On this podcast, I share evidence-based techniques to help you plant, grow, harvest, and store all your family's favorites. Consider me your friend in the garden. So, grab your garden journal and a cup of coffee and get ready to just grow something. So if the audio sounds a little bit different today, it's because we snuck away this weekend after farmers markets on Saturday to do some camping before the heaviest part of the market season begins. We've been really busy so far with one market per week and one day open on the farm plus a delivery day. So the rest of those days have been spent with planting the summer crops and harvesting the spring stuff. But now we're moving into 3 markets per week plus deliveries plus Fridays on the farm. Plus, harvesting the summer stuff will start very soon, and we're still pulling greens and bok choy and cabbage and other spring stuff like crazy. And we still have to finish getting the melons and the okra and the other heat lovers into the ground. So if that all sounds like a lot, it is, which is why we escaped this weekend to get a little calm before the chaos. So if you hear cicadas in the background, or maybe the air conditioner from our little mini RV kick in, whatever, it's because I am recording at the lake. And then I'll have to go find somewhere that I can get signal enough to be able to use my hotspot and upload this bad boy. So we'll see how that goes. So let's jump into your questions. I may not read everybody's names and where the questions came from this time, just because some of you had the same questions as each other and some of you had multiple questions. So I'm just going to sort of go down the list in no real order here, and we're just going to answer some questions and jump into it. Okay. First things first, Jennifer Caputo asked, do you do any stretches before going out in the garden to better prepare your body so that you aren't so sore the next day? So that's an interesting question, and my answer is probably a little bit different than what yours might be because I am out there all the time. So this is my full-time job, is working in my gardens. And so it's a daily thing. It's not unusual to my body. It's sort of used to those actions. So during the busiest parts of the season, I don't really do any sort of stretching or anything. Also, I'm an endurance athlete, so between running and weight training and other kind of sports activities, I'm moving a lot of the time anyway. If I were sitting at a desk all day or in an office somewhere or doing some type of a job where I was a little bit more sedentary, then I absolutely would be doing some stretches or something before going out into the garden, especially if it wasn't something I was doing every single afternoon. If it was just the only time I had to do it was on the weekends and it was 3 or 4 hours at a time, and then you end up very sore the next day, then I absolutely would be doing some sort of stretching. And not stretching in the terms or in the sense of what you traditionally think of a stretch, because now with sort of sports medicine and sports science, we have seen it evolve to the point where we know that a dynamic stretch is actually the best thing to do prior to activity so that you're warming those muscles up. The stretch in and of itself isn't necessarily doing a whole lot for you in terms of getting your muscles ready to work. So you want stretches that actually involve movement, whether it's leg swings or doing, air squats or something to warm up those muscles that you're going to be using, especially anything that involves bending or stretching or reaching. I will say that I make it a point in the off season to do some strength training or continue strength training through the winter time, because if I don't and I jump right back into the farming activities in the spring, I will definitely feel it. My husband and I both have commented about this. You go from being a little bit more sedentary, a little bit less active, right into the farming season, and you're moving and you're bending and you're stretching and you're picking things up and carrying heavy things around. We definitely will get sore. So I try to preemptively nip that in the bud by keeping up on some weight training exercises. And it's nothing fancy. I'm quite literally mimicking the same activities that I'm doing out in the gardens, just in the gym with some weights or something, or even just body weight to help keep myself prepared. So that's kind of how I look at it. So I mean, for me, I don't necessarily do stretches because I don't have to, but if I were more sedentary, then I would absolutely be doing something to prepare myself. So another question that goes right along with this was one that came from Kathy Gormandy, our friend over at PK Farm Flowers. And she said, for the May Ask Me Anything question, I know you're a runner like I am. Did you ever sustain an injury while running or during other activities that prohibited your normal farming and gardening routine? If so, how did you handle it? I broke my ankle while running 1 week before Mother's Day. As a flower farmer, this was the worst possible timing. Thank goodness for a great team and family who rallied to pull it off. Harvesting and planting in a walking boot is still quite a challenge. I have to wear it for 4.5 more weeks. And the sad part about this message from Kathy is that I had actually seen her post that week of Mother's Day that she had all these things to do, but first, a little self-care. She was going for a run, and that was the run where she broke her ankle. I felt so bad, Kathy. I'm so sorry. And the answer to that question is not exactly. I've never actually injured myself doing any of my, running or weight training or sports activities that prevented me from doing anything on the farm, but I actually injured myself on the farm that prevented me from being able to do like some of my running activities. Last spring, I had failed to keep up with my weight training in the off season and jumped right into the spring activities and actually gave myself an overuse injury out in the gardens that prevented me from being able to run for about 3 weeks. And then I had to slowly work my way back into it with some PT exercises and such. And it's not like I really have a choice in the matter when it comes to the farming and gardening activities. That's our livelihood. So I needed to continue to do those, which meant that my running had to take a back seat because I couldn't do both. I would just risk further injury. So I kind of had the exact opposite issue. And basically what it was, yeah, the running had to take the back seat because it wasn't the priority. Obviously, the farming and gardening was. And thankfully, if something like that were to happen where I injured myself in some way and wasn't able to perform my duties as a farmer, my husband works full time here with us. So, he would have to pick up some of the slack, but then we also do still have family in the area, kids and grandkids who would likely rally and be able to come over and absolutely would help. So, and we also have friends here in the farming community and stuff who have always said, and we always say that to each other, if you guys need a hand, if you have problems, if you need help, we're right there to help you. And I know they would do the same thing for us. So thankfully haven't experienced that, and hopefully I will not. So sorry, Kathy. So Jennifer followed up with a semi-related side question that I've been meaning to ask. When I first found your podcast, I binged a bunch of older episodes. Somewhere in there, I remember you talking about how we can forget to eat when we are out there for so long, and there's actually a scientific reason for it. I really wanted to re-listen to it, but I could not figure out which episode it was. Do you remember? So I remembered which episode this was, but I had to go back and look and see which one it was. It's episode 41, which is 6 Ways to Beat the Heat in the Garden. I think that might have been season 1. So probably July when we were talking about lots and lots of heat. And the reason why we feel like we're less hungry or we sort of forget to eat while we're outside doing anything while in the heat is because, number one, digesting food actually produces heat. So it is likely that we have just evolved to eat less on hot days to help keep ourselves cool. When it's hot, our body is already sort of working hard to keep us from overheating. So it doesn't need the extra heat from digesting food. The other theory, too, is that the body may need to burn fewer calories to maintain its core body temperature when the exterior temperature is already high. So as a result from this, we may crave lighter foods like the fruits and vegetables. Well, in that episode, we talked about eating lighter fruits and vegetables or lighter foods like fruits and vegetables because of their higher water content. That actually helps us to stay hydrated. So all of these things sort of work together. So that's the answer to that. And that, like I said, is episode 41, 6 Ways to Beat the Heat in the Garden, if you want to go back and listen to that one. Next set of questions comes from Teresa. She is actually one of our customers here locally with the farm. And she said, how often do I spray the tomato plants with copper sulfate? Peppers also? So she's referring to the copper spray that we use to prevent foliar and fungal diseases, specifically in our tomatoes here in West Central Missouri, but anywhere that you experience foliar diseases or fungal diseases in the spring, usually as a result of heavy rains or really high humidity. That spray is generally used every 7 to 10 days as a preventative, but also can be used once you've seen signs of the diseases to help prevent the spread. Now, if it rains really heavy, then you need to reapply the spray. And you really only have to continue using it until about the time when the humidity starts to get a little bit less extreme or you're not having as much rainfall. But sometimes you have to use it all the way through the season. So it just depends on your current situation. Teresa also asks, what can you use to destroy that white moss, which is the destroyer of so many green leaf vegetables? I believe she is referring to powdery mildew or downy mildew. And once again, this is going to involve using something that is going to change the pH of the leaf surface. So that copper spray would probably work just as well. But the easiest thing that I use is either First Saturday Lime, or you can use baking soda. You can also make a spray out of water and milk. You're just trying to change the pH of the leaf surface so that it's less hospitable to those mildews so that it can't grab hold and keep growing on the leaf surface. She also asks, is it too late to plant some strawberries, and what is the best way to overwinter them if they're in a tower or a bucket container? So you can actually plant strawberries at almost any time, spring, summer, or fall. I've done a couple of episodes. One was on fall planted strawberries. One was specifically just to strawberries in general. Spring plantings are generally going to be bare root strawberries, unless you can find some actively growing ones that you can plant in the spring. But bare root it should only be planted in the spring because they are generally dormant when you get them. And so if you're going to plant in the summer or in the fall, then you want actively growing plants, either started plugs or rooted plants from, runners from somebody else's plants. You can plant them at any time. Just know that if you plant them in the middle of the summer, depending on the variety that you plant, they very well may not fruit the first season. But they'll overwinter and they'll come back even stronger in the spring and give you a nice healthy crop in the spring. So speaking of overwintering, Again, that question was, what was the best way to overwinter them if they're in towers or in bucket containers? What you really want to pay attention to is trying to keep that soil from freezing solid for weeks on end during the winter. That is what is going to damage those tender roots on the strawberry plants. The less volume of soil that we have in that container, the more likely it is that it's going to freeze for long periods of time. So what you want to do is try to protect that soil in some way. When we do this in ground beds or in raised planter beds, we're just using mulch to help this. But when you're talking about a tower garden like a green stalk planter or in buckets, you want to move it up as close as you can to a building. So your house, your garage, someplace where it's going to help insulate it a little bit. If you're in more extreme temperatures, you may want to wrap those containers with something. If you have buckets and you can put them in the garage, that's fantastic. Or if your planters are on rollers and you can bring them into a garage, then that's fine too. That is going to help protect them. But if you just can't get them indoors, then wrapping those containers with some fabric row covers or frost cloth is going to help to insulate them, to help keep that soil from freezing. And then, some straw mulch or something in the top of the containers themselves is also going to help that situation. Next question, what is your favorite thing to show visitors to your garden? This, I think, is twofold. Number one would be showing them my raised garden planters and surprising them at how much food can be grown in one container. So I have I'll show them one of my 4x4 Planter Box Direct planters and show, look, I had 30 heads of lettuce in here, and I had all of these green onions in here, and then it transitioned into tomatoes and basil and zucchinis, and then we're transitioning back into lettuce and other leafy greens for the fall. I think people really underestimate the amount of food that you can grow by volume or by weight in a very small space. And that's sort of the reason why some people just don't get into gardening, because they don't think it would be worth it if they only have one little planter. And I completely disagree with that. You can grow so much food in a very small space. The second part of that is my other kind of favorite thing to show people, which is how to interplant or intercrop their crops and maximize this space that they are using in order to be able to get more out of it in terms of a harvest. Not to mention the benefits that the plants get from each other in terms of the keeping away of the insects and stuff that, confusing that chemical signals that the insects can't home in on one or the other. They sort of get confused. I mean, if you look in nature, there's never just one single thing growing, right? So why do we try to do that in our gardens? You look into, I'm sitting right here looking out at the lake area, and you've got trees, and then you have grasses, and you have bushes in the middle. So all different heights, all sharing the same space, and they are all flourishing, and there is no empty space in and around there. And if there is empty space, well, it's going to be very quickly taken up by something. So that's how it should work in our gardens too. We should be utilizing all of that space. Pair the high or the tall growing plants with the low growing ones. Pair the fast growing ones with the slow growing ones, so that all of that space is utilized and there's less opportunity for the weeds to jump in there in any of those empty spaces. That's why we use mulch. We're mimicking that leaf litter that falls on the ground out in nature and prevents that soil from eroding or being blown away, or for weed seeds from being able to land. So those, I think, are my two favorite things to show people, is how much food you can get in a small space and how to maximize the space that they're working with. Speaking of using leaves as mulch, this question came from Matt Trusty in the gardening group on Facebook, and he's in zone 8A in central Mississippi, which I appreciate that information, by the way. If you're ever asking questions in any gardening group, it's always a good idea, unless it's one that's just local to you, for you to mention what zone you're growing in and what area of the country or the world you are gardening in, because not only does it help the moderators figure out how to answer your question, but it also helps your fellow gardeners who might be in the same area as you to be able to answer that question too, because you guys have more insights because you're all growing in the same area than maybe somebody like me from the outside. I can give you general information, but I may not know the tips and tricks for, your particular growing area. So Matt, thank you for that information. He says, question for the podcast. I live in a neighborhood with tons of mature hardwoods. Rather than put the leaves on the street last fall, I collected an obscene amount of leaves and put them in a chicken wire structure to create leaf mold for beds. Fast forward to this spring, I shredded some of the leaves and mulched almost all the beds. Tomatoes, peppers, watermelon, cucumbers, etc. are all mulched with leaves. It's working beautifully. We're already in the 90s and it's holding moisture in well. My question is this. When all of my summer crops crap out, I would like to just turn these leaves into the beds for organic matter in the soil. If I do that and plant brassicas right behind in the fall garden, am I risking a depletion in nitrogen in the soil by doing so? Thanks. This is a great question. First of all, kudos to you for using the leaves in that manner. Leaf mold is a fantastic mulch. It's a fantastic way to add organic matter back into your soil. The question that Matt is posing here is in relation to the fact that when you add carbon, large amounts of carbon at one time to the soil, the microbes that are responsible for breaking down that carbon into usable forms rely on nitrogen to do that work. So that's not normally a problem. It's just utilizing the nitrogen, and that's still going to remain in the soil. The problem comes when you're also trying to grow plants at the same time that also need that nitrogen. So this is what we, when we talk about, it's stealing nitrogen from the soil. Well, technically it's stealing nitrogen from the plants because the microbes are going to utilize that nitrogen preferentially for breaking down that carbon versus what the plants are going to be able to access. And so your plants may end up being starved of nitrogen until that carbon breakdown process is completed. So when it comes to leaf mold, it's really going to depend on how broken down that leaf mold is. So in general terms, if it was sitting all winter long and now it's also sitting on the top of your soil and is continuing to break down while it's in contact with that soil, then it should be broken down enough to where there's not so much carbon left in that leaf mold that it would steal the nitrogen from those plants. But this is absolutely going to be a judgment call on your part to look at that leaf mold. If you see that there are clumps of dry, crispy leaves still in that leaf mold, that is a good indication that there's still a lot of carbon left in that mold versus the much softer, wetter consistency of an actual leaf mold. So if it's got any of that sort of crunchy, dry stuff, then no, I would not turn it into the soil just yet because I think it absolutely would take more nitrogen to break that down. Your option really is to just leave that leaf mold in place, pull your summer crops out, pull the leaf mold back, plant your brassicas and continue to use that leaf mold as a mulch. And then after your brassicas have been harvested for the season at the end of the year, then go ahead and turn that leaf mold down into the soil and let it sit for the remainder of the winter into early spring. By then, there should be no chance of the nitrogen being sequestered from that by that carbon, and you should be able to plant directly into it right away in the spring without any problem. And hopefully this year you will do the same thing. You'll collect all those leaves and you'll be able to put a fresh layer of leaf mold on top as your mulch and just sort of continue the cycle. I love this idea.
Roses often have a bad reputation for being fussy and hard to grow, and I will admit I was one who agreed with that reputation, but only because most big box store roses are grafted. Heirloom Roses believes roses should be grown the way nature intended, on their own roots, with as little human intervention as possible. With own root roses, you can avoid the headache of dealing with rootstock and worrying about your rose not surviving the winter because own root roses are naturally stronger, more disease resistant, and have a longer life expectancy. Heirloom Roses wants you to invest in your garden by choosing healthy roses on their own roots. With over 900 varieties to choose from and a 1-year guarantee, Heirloom Roses has every rose you could want at heirloomroses.com. You can take 20% off all their roses with code JUSTGROW now through October 31st, 2024. Add some beauty and fragrance to your garden with natural, own root roses and save 20% with code JUSTGROW at heirloomroses.com.
Okay, so this one was just really funny. This was Rich Flint, also in the Facebook group. He said, if I recall from the podcast, the question of the month is, ask me anything, doesn't have to be gardening related. So I'll start off with a joke I heard. Do you know how to tell if someone is a runner? Wait 5 minutes and they'll tell you. As a recovering ultra runner, I know how hard it can be to juggle the time needed to take care of daily mundane tasks such as work and household chores and still find time to train. So my question is, oh hell, I don't have a question. I just wanted to tell you that I run as well. Trails mostly, but roads aren't as bad as we make them out to be. Happy gardening and happy running. So I absolutely appreciated this. I've already mentioned running at least once in this podcast. And it is absolutely true. You always know if somebody's a runner because they will tell you. Next question comes from Brittany McCormick, and she said, when starting out your market farm, what was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome, and what is your biggest hurdle now to overcome? That's a good question. I think the biggest hurdle when we were first starting out was trying to gauge exactly how much we should be growing. So because we started out not necessarily intending to grow specifically for farmers market, we were growing for our community supported agriculture program, which was 15 families or couples that had signed up in the off season, and then they had purchased a share of the harvest in the fall, and we used that money as seed money to get the supplies and everything that we needed to start planting in the spring. And then once the harvest began, then they were going to get their share based on how much they had invested. That was their return on their investment. Prior to this, I hadn't really paid a whole lot of attention to how much I was planting in terms of how much I thought I needed. I hadn't kind of figured that component out yet. We were just growing for ourselves, and I just knew that I had grown so much stuff that we were giving it away to friends and family who were coming over every weekend, and I couldn't can it all and I couldn't freeze it all. And I thought, okay, well, this is a great way to make, some side income. But I hadn't paid attention to the yield that I was getting specifically. Like, okay, I planted X number of cucumbers and I got X number of pounds of cucumbers, and therefore if I want to grow X number of pounds of cucumbers or, harvest it, then this is the number of plants that I have to grow. I hadn't paid any attention to that. So when we got to that next season, when it was time to start planting and growing for somebody other than ourselves, I had to figure that out. Thankfully, I came across a guide that I still use to this day when I'm helping other people figure out what to grow, from University of Missouri Extension. And it had a breakdown of, well, if you are growing, this particular vegetable, then you need this number of plants or this number of row feet per person for fresh use, and then this amount per person for preserving. That was a huge help, at least in getting started. It gave me a starting point. The other part of that was trying to figure out, initially, the idea was we were just going to grow for CSA, and then they were going to pick up at the farmer's market, and then whatever extra we had that we'd harvested that week, we would sell at the farmer's market. We very quickly realized just that first day that we were at market that the demand for what we were growing was really high. And we sold out of all the extras that we brought within probably the first 45 minutes of being there. And this was, a 5-hour market. So we sat there twiddling our thumbs the rest of the time with an empty table, just waiting for our CSA people to come and pick their stuff up. So we kind of had to pivot really quickly and go, oh, we need to plant some more stuff. So again, it was trying to figure out how much do we plant. how much do we anticipate people wanting every week because the crowd changes, the customers change. That probably took a few years to figure out. I continued to use sort of that chart from MU Extension to help me figure that out, but then I was able to start using my own historical notes. So keeping track after that of how much was planted, how much was harvested, and sort of what the weather conditions and stuff were too, to help me figure out, all right, well, this is how much we need to plant next year. And also keeping track of sales records at the farmers market. Well, I brought 30 pounds of zucchini and I sold out. Or I brought 25 heads of lettuce and I came home with 5. Keeping track of that and knowing what the sort of seasonal demand was did help with eventually being able to figure all that out. The biggest hurdle now to overcome is manpower or energy or a combination of both, maybe. All the kids have grown up. They're off the farm. There's nobody really helping us on a day-to-day basis. For a while, my mom was living with us and she was happily helping out on the farm. And, she moved a few years back. And so it's just my husband and I at this point, with the occasional grandkid that might come over, or, the occasional like homeschool kid who might need some hours during the week or whatever to work. But it's nothing consistent. There's nobody there with us day in and day out figuring all this out. And so the division of labor is a little different now, trying to figure out the tasks and what we're able to accomplish is a little bit different. I still bite off way more than we can chew, and I will fully admit that. My garden plan every single year is astronomical, and when we get to the point of the season where we're not only harvesting the early greens and the early spring stuff, but now we're also planting all the summer stuff, and then we're still having to get in there and weed and everything else, that is when I go, okay, something's got to let go. Something's not going to get planted, or we're going to have to plant fewer of something because there just aren't enough hours in the day, which is okay. I've learned that that's not a failure. I've learned that it's just, we are two grown adult human beings who are now, getting a little bit older. I mean, I turned 50 last year. My husband is 9 years older than I am. And, we both have already had previous fairly physical careers, in the Marine Corps and elsewhere. So, we're slowing down a little bit. We're still both very strong, but after a while, maybe you don't want to do as much of that as you used to. So it's the challenge now, I think, is just figuring out the labor, figuring out how we can be more efficient and still accomplish what it is that we want to accomplish, but also the realization that maybe we don't have to. Maybe we don't have to do as much, or we don't have to sell as much or grow as much. And, we can let a little bit of that go. So I think that's our biggest hurdle right now. Okay, my garden homie, Cody, she said, I'm wondering, you do the crop share, the farmer's stand, consulting, and the podcast. Do you do anything else in this vein that pulls an income? What percentage of your income is each aspect, and what percentage of your time? Also, how about a day in the life take on each of those tasks? What's it like to be a garden consultant? Is it only rich folks? Are they likely to do what you tell them needs to be done? Is it hard to collect on your crop share? Are you making much money from the podcast? How do you do it all? Is your hubby still working, or is he a full-time farmhand too? If he works with you, how do you not choke him? I hear these long-term partners can be challenging to work closely with. There's a whole slew of stuff to unpack there. Okay, so let's start with the top. Yes, so the CSA and the farmers markets. So there's 3 farmers markets that we do during the week. Plus we've got the stand open on the farm on Fridays now this year. I do the garden consulting. I limit that to the spring and the fall. Obviously the podcast is year round. That is the extent so far of what we do to pull an income that is gardening or farming related, with the exception of I do have the online courses that I'm working on. So Plan Like a Pro was my first one that I launched. I'm working on several more smaller ones, and we've just started doing gardening classes on the farm that we will also eventually pull income from. So All of these things sort of are working together and diversified. I would say, in terms of percentage, the podcast and the consulting, the Just Grow Something arm of things is a very, very teeny percentage. It's more like, what I pull in maybe pays for the podcast, website hosting and that sort of thing, and then maybe pays for some of my racing fees, or my new running shoes or whatever at this point. Like at this point, it's not actually contributing to the overall household budget, although I would like for that to change. I would like for there to be a little bit of a shift in that. And it's getting there. It's if I had more time to be able to focus on it, it absolutely would get there, which the farm portion of things, I would say, farmers market versus CSA, the income is about 50-50 there. So direct sales to people versus them investing in the farm in the off season, I think is probably it's more like a 60-40 split. I think 40% now comes from the CSA and about 60% comes from selling at the farmers markets, selling on the farm, doing online orders for home delivery, and that sort of thing. A day in the life on each of those tasks would be, every morning there's chores that need to be done with the livestock. We're slowly scaling that back. In fact, we're not going to be selling pork after this year. So that will scale back dramatically. We have also scaled back the number of chickens we were raising because we used to sell the eggs. We have decided not to do that anymore. So this kind of all ties back into Brittany's question about, the challenges. Yeah, this is one of the things is we're kind of scaling things back just a little bit to make it more manageable for us and also be able to do things like what I'm doing right now, which was be able to escape for the weekend and go camping. So, but the chores, those chores get done first thing in the morning. I will absolutely have my coffee first, and then thankfully I walk out the door and I'm right there at work. And so it's checking on everything that's in the greenhouse, making sure everything is properly watered. And the early days, like right now, because it's warm, the earlier I can get out there to do the harvesting, the better, because everything likes to be harvested first thing in the morning before the heat of the day has kicked in. So every morning I've got about an hour and a half where I'm out there just doing harvesting. And what I'm harvesting will depend on, the time of year, obviously. And then we move into sort of mid morning or I guess late morning is when I try to do the most of like the weeding and the trellising and that sort of thing. Once we get to the really hottest part of the day, then I'm coming inside and it's either paperwork, it's either updating inventory or doing bookkeeping or accounting or getting email marketing out for the farm, or I'm taking notes for the podcast, or I'm trying to put a reel together, or editing a TikTok video or something like that to put out for the podcast, or I'm writing up a garden consult and getting that sent off to a client, or I'm doing a soil test or something that I can do indoors that it doesn't involve being out in the hottest part of the day, because I don't mind working in the heat, but being in and amongst the plants during the hottest part of the day is not really the best for them. So we try to stay out during, those hours between 2 and 4 o'clock. And then after 4, I go back out, and usually around 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'll go back out, double check everything in and around the greenhouse, make sure nothing needs to be watered. And then usually that's when I'm doing some planting. So I like to plant the summer stuff, especially when we start getting into the hotter days, in the evening, because it's the part of the day when the heat is starting to wane. So yes, it is still very warm outside, but I can make sure those plants are really well watered before I get them planted, and then water them in really well as I plant them. And then they have the whole evening as the temperatures start to cool off into the overnights to sort of get themselves settled in and prepare themselves for the onslaught of heat the next day. If I transplant them first thing in the morning, I feel like they just don't get a really good chance to get settled in before they get blasted with that heat from that 2 to 4 o'clock time frame, and they might tend to suffer a little bit. So that's sort of how my day ends up going. And then on certain days, I'm preparing either for our deliveries or for market. So if it's the day before, delivery day, then I'm packing up our shares, I'm packing up the orders and getting those ready. I am getting the maps our routes mapped out. My husband and I split up our routes, so he'll go one direction, I go the other direction. So I have to map out all of those and get our lists in place for checking off and making sure that we're hitting everybody. And if it's the night before a market, then I'm making sure that everything has been bagged and prepped and bundled, and then we're, putting them in all their containers and stacking them up to get ready to be loaded the following morning before we go to our farmers markets. So that's sort of the day to day. And in there, in the early spring or in the late fall, I will schedule, usually only one consult per week, just because I don't want to completely interrupt the rest of my workflow for the week. In terms of what it's like to be a garden consultant, it's fun. I really enjoy getting to go to people's houses, look at what their garden situation is, or help them figure out what their garden situation will be if they're brand new. Help them design a space, help them put together a plan of what to plant and when. Sometimes they don't need a whole lot of help. Sometimes it's just, hey, we need to just do a soil test and figure out what's going on. Here's how you can do some interplanting and some companion planting. This is maybe a better, choice for you versus this other thing that you were growing. And sometimes it's the full thing. I'm designing a plan for them for the next 4 years, including crop rotations, and I'm helping them lay out their garden beds and that kind of thing. And then there's, somewhere in between. So, but it's super fun to see what people want to do with their gardens. It's fun to see sort of what their goals are. It's fantastic to be able to help somebody, learn to be a little bit more self-sufficient, even if it's just a hobby. I mean, they may not need it for their family. It's just something they want to do, and that's perfectly fine. Getting your hands in the dirt in any way, shape, or form is fantastic. It's great for your health, but also it's a skill that, needs to be learned, and it takes some practice. And I like seeing where people start and sort of where they get to and watch their progress. It's fantastic. No, it is not only rich folks. I have several just sort of, working class, blue collar clients that really just desperately want to know how to better be able to feed their families. I do have some folks that have, a good amount of money, and they want to do it either as a hobby, or they have something very specific that they like to grow or they like to eat that they can't find locally a lot of the time. And so, it's everybody in between. And I think part of it too is I'm not charging an arm and a leg for these services, and I'm not doing like a total like landscape design. It's not a, total backyard makeover type of a thing. I mean, it's very utilitarian. And so I think that lends itself to almost anybody being able to afford my services. So, are they likely to do what you tell them needs to be done? That totally depends on the client. I mean, I have some who absolutely do. They follow it to a T. They email me follow-up questions. They'll send me pictures, and I can give, them responses to be able to help them get better. Then there are some who just, maybe get the information and then I like literally never hear from them again, which is kind of bizarre. But that's just the way it is. And I mean, everybody's lifestyle and everybody's way of managing things is completely different. But I mean, as far as I can tell, most of them generally, do what I suggest or recommend, and it generally works out pretty well for them. So, oh, is it hard to collect on your crop share? So with the CSA, we have been doing this for so long. We actually have not added any new customers since 2020. And the only reason we really added any new ones in 2020 was because people were having such a hard time being able to get food at the store or be able to get to the store. We were in the middle of the pandemic, and so we extended our CSA that year. We added more families as part of like a special summer share, so that more people would have access. And then we gave them the option the following year, if they wanted to stay on, that they could. I don't know if it's because we've been doing this for so long, or because people start with us and they really like how we do things. We don't ever have anybody really drop out of the program unless they move, or they just get to the point where they're sort of elderly and they're just not eating as much in the terms of fruits and vegetables anymore, and so they really just don't need us anymore. Or they retire and they're going to be like traveling a lot and they just don't have a need for a weekly delivery of CSA. That's it. Other than that, I mean, once you're in the program, most of the time you are in the program for forever. So we actually have people who have been with us from the very beginning, the very first season, and we are in our 17th year of doing this. So in that regard, I don't have any problem collecting our shares because we've made it very flexible for them. You can either choose, we open registration in October, and we haven't added any because we're not opening new spaces up. So because, again, back to the previous question of what our challenges are right now, that part of the sort of downsizing has been we limited the CSA. We dropped it back to about 50 members instead of 75 at one point, and we haven't like replaced anybody as they've dropped off. So we've bounced around 48 to 50 or so for the past few years. And I mean, these people most of them have been with us for years and years and years. And so they get the option in the fall of being able to pay it all up in one lump sum, or they can just give me a $50 deposit and then I will bill them in 4 increments over the winter time. So they just get to make 4, installment payments, just so long as everything is paid up by, I think, March 1st, so that I have plenty of time to be able to get the last of the supplies and stuff that I need. And now we can automate it through things like Square automated invoicing. It just automatically sends, and they can choose to have it automatically, debited off of their card without having to do anything. So that makes it easy on them. So in that regard, it's actually been very, very easy. And we've been really fortunate too that we have just great families in our CSA program, and they're just as excited to be a part of the program as we are to have them. And so payment has never really been an issue. Are you making much money from the podcast yet? I think I get a little bit more now in terms of the advertising because there are more people listening. So the sort of automatic ads that are placed now actually are drawing some kind of steady income every month. I also have had some sponsors come in that have actually paid outright to have their ads. You've heard Heirloom Roses being sponsored, the past couple of months. They came in, they approached me and asked to sponsor, which was fabulously flattering. And so that has provided a little bit. The Patreon, with the couple dollars here and there that I get from people every month absolutely helps. So it sort of all adds together. But it's still, I mean, I'm not going to be paying my mortgage anytime soon with what I make off of the advertising and stuff. And that's okay. That wasn't necessarily why I started the podcast. I think the advertising money and the Patreon funds help, again, to kind of make this to where it's at least it's not running in the red. I don't have to put out money out of pocket to host the website and to do all these things, or to buy a new microphone or whatever. It kind of pays itself. I also, get enough to be able to pay for my coffee habit, which is extensive, let me tell you. And so, yeah, now I'm making a little bit of money. I think last year I might have drawn, I think it might have been a total of $1,200 out of everything. So maybe $100 a month through everything. I mean, if I'm being completely honest. So, again, not a whole lot, but hey, I mean, if you guys want to help out, you can go join the Patreon and, $2, $3 a month or whatever to pay for my coffee. I totally appreciate it, and there's little things like the merch and that sort of thing. So, and when you add in the consulting, the consulting and then the classes and things, again, multifaceted, trying to do, variable streams of income to kind of add up into one nice collective. So eventually we'll get there. Maybe when we hit, I don't know, 400 episodes, I can come back and say, yeah, now I'm making money off of this. We'll see. How do you do it all? I prioritize pretty well when it comes to what my goals are. So if I have a goal of getting something done, then it takes priority, and something I know has to take the back seat. I do not lose any sleep. Let me tell you, I spent 15 years with some chronic illnesses, one of which greatly affected my ability to be able to sleep. And now that I've had some surgery to be able to repair some of those problems, I can sleep fabulously well. I used to be able to barely get 2 or 3 hours of sleep. Now I can sleep 8 or 9 hours, and I guard my sleep like crazy. So I am not losing sleep over trying to get all of these different tasks done. And I recognize that, as my husband puts it, some of these are self-inflicted. So, nobody else is expecting me to make sure that I get an email out every Friday, or that I post a new reel, or that I'm, doing something on YouTube. That nobody's expecting that but me. And that's one of the benefits of not making a ton of money off of this right now, is because I'm only beholden right now to like one sponsor at the moment to make sure that these episodes get out and that their ad gets out. There's nobody on YouTube who is paying me to do any of that kind of stuff, so it's only me that I'm answering to, and I have learned to be pretty flexible with myself. So if it doesn't get done the day that I think it should have, then it just gets moved to the next day's task list. And if it gets moved too many times, then I have to go back and reevaluate and go, all right, well, is that actually a priority? Because if not, then it's just going to come off the list. There's no reason to keep moving it. Is your hubby still working, or is he a full-time farmhand too? No, this is our full-time gig. We both farm full-time. I did it the first, I think it was the first 2 years. I did it mainly by myself, and him coming home on the weekends or in the evenings and weekends and helping. He came off active duty and was home for about 6 months, and it was full time for both of us for about 6 months. And we still had all the kids, and we were still brand new at this, and we weren't making enough money at it. And so he went back to work. He took a contract job that was supposed to be temporary. And 2 years later, he was still on that contract job. But at that point, we were ready to expand the farm, and we were doing well enough that he came home, and I said, okay, we have to make a decision. Either you continue to work outside of the farm and I run the farm by myself, which means that we don't expand and we keep things just the same as what they are right now, or you got to quit and you got to come work full time with me, because I can't get any bigger at this if it's just me by myself, with the kids. And so the decision was made that he was going to quit and he was going to come work on the farm. So we both work full time on the farm. This is what we do. And so how do I not choke him? We ask ourselves that a lot, and we recognize that we are very unique in the fact that we, can live together, work together, still want to go off and go camping together. He has started running with me now, not necessarily with me, but he's, sort of running as a way to get back into shape. And that's kind of adjacent to what I'm doing. So we totally recognize that we are very unique in the fact that we're not at each other's throats all the time. We're not arguing. We're not. And I don't know why that is. I think we both recognize that we each have our specific strengths and specific weaknesses. And so when one of us is good at something, the other one just sort of steps out of the way and says, okay, cool, you take this, and vice versa. And I also am not the type of a person who is a nag or who harps on things. Like, I'll ask you to do something, and if it doesn't get done, I might remind you a couple of times, but at that point, it's kind of like my to-do list. If I have reminded you and it hasn't gotten done, either I just need to do it myself or it needs to come off the list, because obviously it's not a priority to one or both of us at that point. And then so it just kind of rolls off my back. It's not that big of a deal. And same thing with him. I can tell when I'm getting on his last nerve, and he just knows to walk away, go get on his tractor, go do something. But we're also not always working side by side. We're always working adjacent to each other. He'll be off on the tractor somewhere, moving compost around or whatever, and I'll be in another field and I'll be, planting, whatever crop is going in at the time. And then we come together when we need to work on tasks together. And then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, let's go in, let's get dinner, let's sit, we'll watch a show. We carve out time to just have it be downtime and not work time. But then we also have our separate interests. He'll go into his office and he will go and play his guitar, and I will go into my office and I will record a podcast or, whatever it is that I'm working on. So that's how we don't choke each other. So I appreciate all those questions, Cody. Those were good. Okay, Shelly Roscoe from my email had a couple of questions. The first one was, how do you maintain even temperature in your greenhouse? I had my seedlings in the greenhouse with a small heater to keep them warm until I could plant them outdoors. Like you, I'm in Cass County, Missouri, and as you know, we had some crazy weather this spring. When we had an early warm spell, I went out to check on them, and the temperature in the greenhouse was over 100 degrees. I opened the front flap and some of the roll-up windows to let in some fresh, cooler air. It was supposed to stay warm for a few days, so I left the windows rolled up to keep it from getting too hot again. It was during that time that we had a huge wind storm, and apparently the windows let enough wind enter the greenhouse that it tried to fly away. We're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. It's not an expensive greenhouse, but it is a decent size, 15 foot by 7 foot by 7 foot, and fortunately the cover wasn't damaged. We were able to reset the bent frame, but will require some reinforcement before I can put the cover on this fall to extend the growing season. So my question is, how do I maintain the temperature inside the greenhouse so it doesn't get too hot or cold, but doesn't act like a kite and try to fly away again? Thank you for all the great information in your podcast. I've learned so much from you, and I love the fact that you're in the same area as me and can give advice specific to the issues in our region. Thank you, Shelly. Yeah, I will tell you, the very first greenhouse we had was actually like half of a high tunnel or a hoop house. So it wasn't like a traditional greenhouse. We had gotten it at an auction and we put it together, and it was 48 foot long and 20 feet wide, I believe, maybe 25 foot wide. And again, just a hoop house. And I had all my plants out there, and I was using it as a greenhouse. It was close enough to the house. This is when we were on the 5 acres, that I was able to get out there with water and whatever I needed to. And I had the fronts open. I had the sides rolled up because, it was hot. And that happens with these greenhouses. It doesn't matter if it's a greenhouse, if it's a hoop house, if it's a high tunnel, or even like a low caterpillar tunnel that you'll put out into your rows. Anytime you are covering something with plastic, as soon as the sun comes out, it doesn't matter how cold it is outside, it is going to heat the inside of that hoop up tremendously, and it will very easily get to over 100 degrees in just a matter of hours. And so I had the sides in the front up, and sure enough, all of a sudden we had a storm come through. And I remember standing in my bedroom, looking out the front window, looking at this greenhouse or tunnel, and thinking to myself, I wonder if I should run out there really quick and close those sides. And no sooner did that thought cross my mind, but we had a huge gust of wind, and I watched that entire structure lift up out of the ground and then slam itself back down again. And the top bars, the rounded bars, collapsed in on themselves. And I went, well, there goes that thought. And it was devastating. And it was all the money that we could muster at the time to be able to buy this thing at auction. And it had taken us, I don't know how long to put the darn thing together again. We were brand new at this. And then to get the plastic put on it was a whole other story. And now, in just one storm, it had literally just practically crumbled. Now, like you, we were able to get the supports put back up, and thankfully the plastic hadn't ripped or anything, and so we were able to salvage it and move on. But I will say that anchoring those things, and this one was anchored. There was concrete blocks in the ground, and that that they had basically come with, and the poles were in there, but the poles hadn't been completely secured, and so it still was able to lift it up a little bit. Our current greenhouse is definitely, the poles are down deep in the ground. It's not lifting up, it's not going anywhere. And so that's the main thing. And even with smaller greenhouses, or even the pop-up ones that you put in your backyard, which I've had a couple of those too, it's really, really important to make sure that they are staked down really well as best you can. Sometimes there's nothing you can do, especially, when the winds are crazy, and no, Cody, I'm not going to sing for you again. But when the winds come whipping down the plane, that can definitely cause those greenhouses to have some problems. In terms of regulating the temperature, it is difficult, especially if you don't have any sort of automation. I would love to have one of the greenhouses that's got the tops that open automatically based on the temperature. That really helps dramatically in terms of venting. But when you're doing everything manually, it is a bit of a game, and trying to pull the sides up and open the front. If you can run electricity in some way, even if it's just a extension cord to get out there, and run a fan to help circulate the air, that is a huge help in terms of regulating that air temperature. The other thing is shade cloth. And so it's just black cloth. Sometimes it's gold. They have varying degrees of light that they allow to filter in, but that is an invaluable tool for being able to help cover you can either put it on the outside or drape it on the inside to help filter some of that light, to help shade some of the area in there. That will also help to regulate those temperatures. On the opposite end of that, that it not getting too cold, if you can use a space heater safely, then that's the way to go. We use a diesel heater that helps to warm that space. And then I also do like secondary sort of hoops in the inside. So it's like a tunnel within a tunnel in our greenhouse to help regulate those temperatures, because I'm not going to go and, get a big old, wall-sized propane heater or whatever to heat that greenhouse up. So we use a small diesel heater. We also have a big wood-burning furnace on the backside of ours that we can heat with wood. So we've tried multiple ways of doing this over the years, but if you don't have those options, then just additional layers in the inside. So a hoop within a hoop, and then also putting frost cloth on. Those are the best ways that you can help to sort of regulate the temperatures or maintain the temperature. It is a challenge. I mean, there are days when it can dry, like you said, go up to 100, 110 degrees in there, and then it might drop into the 40s overnight, and which is not great for the plants. So sometimes it may just be seeing if you can position your greenhouse in a place where maybe you've got some trees nearby that might be able to shade it in the afternoon when it gets to be the hottest. Shelley's second question was, I searched your podcast and didn't see one on growing Brussels sprouts. I've tried them from seed and from store-bought seedlings and haven't had much luck, but I love them and would absolutely love to grow some. So with my experience with Brussels sprouts, which is very limited, because I've never actually been able to grow a successful set of Brussels sprouts, mostly because I actually haven't taken the effort. They've usually been sort of an afterthought for me, but this season I actively have gone ahead and put them in the spring at the same time I did my other brassicas, and they look beautiful right now. So, of course, we've had the benefit of this being a fantastic spring. All the leafy greens and all the brassicas have been done really well just because we've had a lot of rain and it's been nice and cool. But the Brussels sprouts, number one, take a really long time. Most of them are a 90-day, if not 110-day crop. And so just like with most of our brassicas, they're going to prefer to be growing when the temperatures are cooler. So if you can try them for a fall crop, planting them in the late summer, harvesting them in the fall, they will get a chance to get to maturity during the time of year when the temperatures are getting cooler. versus planting them in the spring when they're growing and maturing when the temperatures are getting warmer. So I say that those Brussels sprouts that I've got right now are looking fantastic, but that doesn't mean that 3 weeks from now that they don't start to look horrible because all of a sudden our temperatures have jumped up and they're staying, in the upper 80s or low 90s, and then suddenly they're suffering. So my best advice is just try to modify when it is that you are growing them. If it hasn't been successful in the spring, then try it again for the fall. So I think that's it. I think that's all the questions. Of course, that was an hour's worth of questions, but I appreciate, you guys and your curiosity and giving me a chance to sort of chit chat with you a little bit on maybe not a specific topic, but on a variety of topics. And as always, keep those questions coming. I'm happy to answer them. Usually, if you're sending me a DM or an email, I will just directly answer you. But if it's something that's of interest, then I may actually turn it into a standalone podcast episode. I mean, I may have to do one specifically on Brussels sprouts after I get through this season. Once I can say successfully that I have actually grown Brussels sprouts, then I might be able to offer some advice. So thanks for hanging out with me today for this 200th episode of the podcast. I have no intention of slowing down anytime soon, despite all of the things that we're doing on the farm and all the things that are going on with Just Grow Something as a brand. This remains probably one of the most effective ways that I can get information out to gardeners who are just trying to learn how to grow their own food. And I truly, truly, truly believe in the power in food and that everybody should just grow something of their own, hence the name of this show. So until next time, my gardening friends, keep on cultivating that dream garden, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Just Grow Something podcast. For more information about today's topic and to find all the ways you can get in touch with me or support the show, go to justgrowsomethingpodcast.com. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep learning and keep growing.